Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from July 23rd, 2021, and I'm recording this on January 21st, 2022. As always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant, because the comic market is always moving and changing a little bit. So, as always, we're also looking back at the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week and the CBSI Hot Top 10. Those are the two lists I look at. Obviously, there's other lists out there, but this gives us a selection of potentially up to 20 books to look at to see how they've done in the 6 months since they were hot. We do this so that we understand what factors made these books hot, what's happened to them since, how are they doing in the market now, so that we can all make a little better decisions about what we chase, what we're patient on, and how we prioritize the books that we buy. So, without further ado, let's get into this week's list because we got 19 books to talk about. First up, we're going to talk about Kaiju Score #1. This hit the list because it was optioned by Sony, which generally means see in 3 to 5 years or longer. But anyway, it was optioned by Sony, so this jumped up. This 2020 release jumped up to a $20 to $30 book. 9.8 was hitting 200. Now it's a $5 to $15 book. 9.8s are all the way down to $30 to $60 on recent sales. This turned into a big old trap. On the 9.8 side, if there were more sales, I might have called this a dumpster fire. This has not been a good investment at all, because there's been no news since it was optioned, and that's usually the case on these kind of books. It takes a long time for this stuff to happen. Next, we have Tokyo Ghost #1, and this has been on the list a couple different times because it was optioned. This hit the list again this time because there was an announcement that the script was finished. But since then, we haven't got any rumors about shooting or casting or anything like that. But back then, it caused raw copies to jump up to $25. The 9.8 was around $185. And this was further along than the previous book, and it was going for less. Notice that, huh? But now it's still a $10 to $30 book on the raw side. You can get some deals, but it's actually been pretty steady. 9.8s have backed up to about 120, but again, not many sales there, so we're going to focus on the raw side when we call this steady, and then I'll be back. Again, we're a couple of years away probably still on this one. Next, we're going to move with that. Those were our two option books of the week. We're going to move into covers. We only had 2 covers this week. First up was Avengers #2. This is the Alex Ross Kang variant that's now been on the list 3 weeks in a row. This kind of went back and forth between the lists. And this particular week it was back on the Tom list. Raw copies back then were going for 25 to 30, which is the same as when we talked about it last week when it was on the other list. And now it's a $5 to $20 book. 9.8 only costs you $70. There's no real key here. It's just a cool Kang cover, and that's why it's down, and it's an I'll be back because there's not as much buzz around Kang right now, even though we know he's still coming. And that goes for the next book as well, Avengers Forever #1. This Carlos Pancio Kang variant that was limited to 5,000 copies was all the way up to $100 plus for raw copies back then. In the aftermath or finale of the Loki show, 9.8 will still cost you $175 to $210, but there's only been one raw sale because nobody's willing to pay the listing prices, and that was for $20. Yeah, this thing is all the way down. This has turned into a bit of a dumpster fire. Raw copies are still listed at that $100 plus, but they're not selling. So yeah, this one has definitely turned out to not be a good deal if you chased it back then. With that, we're going to move into Comic Buzz, and we actually have a lot of Comic Buzz this week, which is nice to see, and not just MCU or option news type stuff. First up on the Comic Buzz is Nice House on the Lake #1. This series was kind of building momentum. This was another Tinian series. It's obviously still coming out. It's basically its last project with DC under their Black label. Back then, raw copies were up to $30 to $35. I thought this might be worth it. I thought it might continue to build, but it's went on hiatus. It's kind of slowed down the releases, and now it's down to a $15 to $20 book. 9.8 only cost you $80 to $100, so down from those $30 to $35. So definitely an I'll be back on this one. Next, we have Basilisk #1. This was our only book that was on both lists, and this second print of Basilisk hit the list because it had a preview of House of Slaughter in it. So people were jumping all over this, and it was a $30 to $35 book back then because of the preview, not because of the story, or not because of the actual comic, just because of the preview. Now it's a $5 to $15 book. 9.8 will cost you $50 to $100. I was really down on people chasing this, and maybe more so than what it ended up, but it definitely turned into a trap and a book that was definitely not worth going after at those crazy prices. I will say there was a recent sale at $40, so still back up in that range, or actually a little higher than it was. But it's clear outliers. They only sell anywhere close to that kind of value. Next, we have Deadpool Secret Wars #2, the Botcholo variant, the first appearance of Gwenpool here on the cover. No real reason why this was spiking back then, other than maybe people just specking a little bit on Gwenpool. Raw copies of this were up to around $100. 9.8s were up to around $400. Now it's a $50 to $150 book, depending on condition. Raw 9.8s will cost you $250 to $380, so it's backed up a little bit. You can find some deals. It's gonna all be back, but almost at steady on this one. I went with down a little bit because of the 9.8 sales and most of the Raw sales were kind of averaging around 80 instead of 100 like they were before. So that's why I went with it down on this one. Excuse me. Next, we have Doctor Strange and the Sorcerer Supreme #1. This is the first appearance of Nina the Conjurer, who the rumors were was going to be the new Sorcerer Supreme in the follow-up to the death of Doctor Strange, which caused this book raw copies to jump up to 20, 9.8 to hit 300. We now know she is not the new Sorcerer Supreme. It is Cleo, which is, this book is backed up because of it. I thought if she did become, it was probably worth it, but she didn't. It's 10 to 30, so you can still kind of in that same range, but the 9.8s have backed up a lot, 125 to 175. And you definitely can get this for under $20 now. So this one definitely turned into an I'll be back because spec on the wrong character. And the next book is just the variant of this. So it's Doctor Strange and the Sorcerer Supreme #1, the 1 in 25 Javier Rodriguez cover. This one, a 9.8 of this one, all the way up for 600 plus. Now there's really only 2 recent sales. 2 raw copies went for around 125. So it's hard to really judge what's going on here, but definitely seems like a bit of an I'll be back. Listings are still up around those prices, and are just not really selling because, again, this is not the character that became the Sorcerer Supreme. With that, we're going to move on to Books of Doom #1. This is kind of a new retelling of the origin of Doom from 2006. This series was, and no real reason why people were jumping on it back then, but raw copies jumped up to $70 to $100. This one turned into a dumpster fire. Right now, it's only a $5 to $20 book. I know we think we're getting Doom at some point, but no real reason to pay crazy prices for this. This definitely, I thought it was a trap back then, and now but it was even worse than that in this case. With that, we're going to move to War of the Bounty Hunters, Jabba the Hutt #1. So Star Wars War of the Bounty Hunters, Jabba the Hutt #1. This is the Coelho 1 in 25, the first appearance of Devalompop, a new bounty hunter character you can see here on the cover. Very colorful looking character. Right out of the gate, this 1 in 25 was going for 60 plus. So just slightly over double, but didn't make it to triple. What do I tell you on those when we do when I'm doing the cash or trash? That usually means they're going to end up between ratio and double. That's what happened here. This is now a $30 to $40 book. So turned into a bit of a trap from 60 down to about 30, 35, so almost a 50% decrease. So yeah, which is pretty typical for 1 in 25s, whether it's for the cover or in this case, it was actually a first appearance and it still did that same pattern. Next, we have Star Wars, The High Republic Adventures #6. This is the first appearance of Leox, Afi, and actually Geode, who I didn't put on here. 3 characters that appeared in one of the earlier books. This is their first comic appearance of The High Republic, and this one was going for 15 to 20 at release. Now it's a $5 to $20 book. I still put this as steady, as most of the sales are around that $15 range. 9.8 will cost you 60 to 80. So definitely an I'll be back. You definitely have room on this one. But yeah, so this has been pretty steady overall over the last 6 months. Definitely some interest in these High Republic characters. We'll see how long that lasts with them transitioning to the next phase. But definitely some interest here so far. We'll see if we get an actual cartoon or live action project coming out of High Republic anytime soon. Also could change a lot of what's going on here. Next we have House of Mystery number 290, the first appearance of I, Vampire. This raw copies of this were going for $80. 9.8 was going for $600. Based on the fact that there were rumors that there was going to be the DC Vampire versus Vampires event that was supposed to be 10 yen, and they thought this character was going to come back. I know this is actually coming out now. I have no idea if this is any good. I have zero interest in it, but it's still a $30 to $100 book for raw copies. 9.8's only backed up slightly, down to $550-ish with the most recent sale. So a little bit of an I'll be back, but pretty steady overall, it looks like, on this book and for the prices. You'll have to tell me in the comments if this DC versus Vampires thing is any good. It didn't interest me at all. So next we have Future State Teen Titans number 2, the Dustin Nguyen variant of Red X. So obviously this was all the buzz related to Red X, and basically this was that he was going to also join the Suicide Squad story. Back then caused this cover to jump up to $15. 9.8 was going for $80. Now it's $1 to $15 book, and 9.8 is a $30 to $60 book. This one's definitely down, marginally a trap. I listed as an I'll be back just on the values, but yeah, cool cover. But boy, they've milked this Red X thing. I don't think they've ever still showed you who he is, even a year later now from when they first introduced him in Future State. So they've been milking this, and I'll be honest, I've completely lost interest at this point. So there you go. Next, we are going to finally move into DC movie and then into some MCU stuff, but we have one DC movie book first, and that is Detective Comics 359. You guys know I love this book. This is the first appearance of Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, and this hit the list because Leslie Grace was cast as Batgirl for the HBO. That announcement came out for the HBO movie, which they're now talking about maybe going to theaters. We'll see. And basically, but here's the thing, this is on Tom's list, and they do this sometimes with bigger books, and it makes no sense to me, and it's kind of annoying and hard to track. And basically all they said was average sale this week was $5,200 across all grades. They didn't even say if that was slabs, if that was anything, just $5,200, which tells you absolutely nothing about the book. So I did kind of go and dig a little bit, and the book is slightly up. I follow this book pretty closely because I have a copy and it's one of my favorite characters. The book is up a little bit over the last 6 months. Not a lot. It's been kind of creeping. We did get a recent photo of her, which might also contribute to that. But raw copies on this will cost you $400 to $1,000 plus, depending on the condition. 3.5 has been selling for around $800. A 7.5 went for $3,500 on the last sale. So that gives you an idea where the book is at. But it has been kind of steadily creeping since they announced this project and since this casting. So it's actually our only book that's up this week. So there you go. Next we have Marvel Spotlight number 2, first appearance of Werewolf by Night. And this hit the list because somebody re-released started talking about some dialogue that was an interview that was 2 years old, where Feige said something about that they were hoping to bring Werewolf by Night to the MCU at some point. So it was a 2-year-old conversation, but I know that we also had the rumors about the Halloween special, and a lot of that's why this hit the list. Raw copies were $300 to $500 back then. A 5.5 went for $700. Now raw copies are $2 to $4, so kind of in that lower range and a little lower than what they were before. A 5.5 now costs you $450 to $600. So it seems like it's backed up a little bit, kind of across these grades. So it's definitely down a little bit, not a lot, but it was a good book before this speculation, so probably is not much different than what it was before the speculation. 3 books to go. Next up, we have Giant Size Avengers number 2. This is a Kang story plus a reprint of Ramatut's origin. It's what caused us to the list. Again, all things Kang back then were hot. Raw copies back then were going for $45. Now $5 to $60. For the most part, it's around like a $30 book, $35 book. So it's down a little bit. I'll be back, but quite a range depending on the condition here. So this one did not back up as much as I thought, but it has backed up a little bit. Next, we have all new Marvel Now .1, first appearance of Kamala Khan. And back then there was rumors that we might get this show by the end of 21. So that was what prompted people to, like, the spike on here was some rumors. Now it looks like we're not getting this till like the middle of 22. Because it looks like Moon Knight's next, and then maybe even She-Hulk before we get this one. So it might not even be till the end of 22 that we're getting this show. But anyway, it caused raw copies to jump up to a $350 average. 9.8s were 16 to 2,000. This book is backed up a little bit. I put straight cash because I thought that was the timing of the show, and I thought if it comes out, then yeah, this book will be even more than this. I was, of course, wrong because the show hasn't come out yet. Raw copies now are 150 to 300. 9.8 will cost you 15 to 8, so a little bit, 15 to 1800, so a little bit down, not a lot. Still a lot of interest in this character, and the show is definitely still coming, probably in the fall, I would guess, at this point. And then our last book of the week just goes to show that as collectors, we don't really care about first appearances that much. We're more interested in the covers, it seems like. And this is Iron Man number 282, first War Machine on the cover. We do get Tony in the armor in this issue, but and this had everything to do with the announcement of the Armor Wars show, and this was, so we'd had the announcement, and then we got confirmation that Don Cheadle had signed on, is what caused this book to hit the list. But here's the thing. 281 is the first appearance of the armor that becomes the War Machine armor, and Rhodey wears it for the first time in 284. Tony wears the armor in this one. They don't use the name War Machine in this book, although it is on the cover. But this is the book everyone wants because of the cover, kind of like a 181 on a particular Wolverine. So raw copies of this back then were up to $125. 9.8 was going for $800. Now raw copies will cost you $30 to $120. 9.8 costs you $500 to $600. So again, we're ways out from the show. The expectation is this will be a 2023 show. So yeah, this one's definitely down, and it'll all be back as we're kind of in between news on this, and we're ways out from the show. So that is all 19 books this week. I want to thank you for hanging in with me for all of those. I appreciate you guys watching, and we will catch you next time.